Minnesota's animal cruelty law has popped up in the news recently on a few different types of cases. And they range from things like people not caring for horses properly and on malnourishing them, to outright intentional killing of animals or companion pets. Minnesota's statute has different penalty provisions depending on the type of crime involved in the cruelty. The statute number is 343.21, and that talks about things like torture in subdivision 1 and then cruelty in subdivision 7. And there are a number of other forms of mistreatment of animals that are governed within that statute. And the penalties really come down to what type of harm was caused on the animal, whether the animal was livestock or was what's called a companion animal, like a service dog, for example, or a family pet, and then the degree of harm to the animal, like I've mentioned, as well as whether this was done intentionally in front of another person with the idea of terrorizing them. For example, I had a case recently where a man was accused of strangling his cat, and the government alleged that he did that with the intent to terrorize his significant other. But we brought a motion to exclude that charge on the basis that at the time that he allegedly harmed the cat, his significant other was not present in the same room, and therefore it wasn't done with intent to terrorize another person. And the court had commented that it was going to grant our motion and dismiss that charge. What that led to was more favorable treatment in the case in terms of the defendant in the case, because the government had overcharged that portion of the case. So it's important to have a lawyer that looks at the very fine print on these statutes and can make a determination whether or not the government can prove each and every element beyond a reasonable doubt. If not, you should be bringing motions to dismiss certain charges or portions or penalties of charges based on the evidence. So getting to the torture, how that reads is that no person shall overdrive, overload, torture, cruelly beat, neglect, etc. Animals, and whether those animals are there for labor or for not. And then with respect to the cruelty, that's defined in subdivision 7 as no person willfully shall instigate in any other way further any act of cruelty to any animal or animals, or any act tending to produce cruelty to animals. And so those are the types of things, the conduct that the government is looking for if they charge out animal cruelty. And then in terms of the penalties, there's a broad range. They can start with simply a misdemeanor, which means there's a maximum of 90 days in jail and a $1,000 fine, and that is for just general harm to an animal that's not very egregious. They're enhanceable, which means if you've done this before and pled guilty to it or have been convicted of it, and you do it again, then it's more severe to have a second offense on this sort of thing, and they can make that a gross misdemeanor or even a felony. So the idea is if you've been punished for it once and you're convicted of it again, it gets worse by having a prior. Now, if you've caused death or great bodily harm either through torture or through cruelty, and you've done that to a pet or a companion animal, you can be sentenced up to 2 years, which is a felony. Anything 366 days or more is a felony. If you've intentionally done this and you've caused substantial bodily harm to a pet or companion animal, and you've done that in an attempt to threaten, intimidate, or terrorize another person, then that's punishable by no more than 2 years as well. And then if you've caused death or great bodily harm to a companion animal or a pet, and you've done that with the intent to threaten, intimidate, or terrorize another person, that is a punishment of up to 4 years in prison. So that's the most serious under the animal cruelty charges that there are, and that's the one that we sought to dismiss in the case I just referred to that I had. There are also other what are called collateral consequences in the statute. One is that you have to pay restitution if you plead guilty to this charge, and there can be other civil remedies as well, such as reasonable costs for things like loss of income if it's a service animal, veterinary expenses, and things like that. With respect to your rights to have other animals. If you've had other pets in the home and you've allegedly, or you plead guilty to doing this to one of your pets, you have a potential to lose all of your other pets that you care for as well, or other service animals in the home as well, or perhaps other livestock that you have. So that's another collateral consequence that isn't mentioned very often, but someone ought to be advised of that before they make a decision whether to plead guilty or not. If you have other questions on animal cruelty cases, my name is Ryan Pacyga. You can find me at arrestedminnesota.com or at 612-339-5844.